Hey everybody, Neil Malik from Knack Training here, bringing you another Everyday Office video. In today's video, I'd like to answer a question that came in via email about how to create a count inside of a pivot table. So to begin with, as you can see here, I have some basic data. This data happens to be what department people work in, what type of insurance they have, and what their insurance premiums are. And if I click onto this data set, go to the Insert tab at the top of my screen, and click the first button on the far left, this Pivot Table button, I'll be able to make a pivot table. I'll go ahead and put it into the existing worksheet right over here on the right so we can see both simultaneously, and then hit OK. Now it's at this point where typically what people will do is do things like click the checkbox for department and then maybe click the checkbox for insurance type, so that, for instance, within the finance department, we see that there are different people who have dependent insurance, family insurance, individual insurance, etc. And then if we wanted to see what the total premiums were that we were paying to each of these different types of insurance, we can click on the checkbox for premium here. To go a step further, we can click on Sum of Premium down here in the bottom right, go to Value Field Settings, and we can adjust the formatting by changing the Number Format button here in the bottom left, and then simply clicking on something like Currency or Accounting Formatting so that we can see this as a prettier dollar value. But very often people get stuck in this idea that what we can do is add numbers. But in fact, if you notice, one of the things we can do is we could take premium, put it back into the values box a second time. And right here where it says the sum of the premium to, if I click on it, go to Value Field Settings, this count feature is very important that you recognize the count feature is counting how many instances there are. It's not counting how many unique instances there are, it's counting how many there are in each of these different areas. So I'll click on count. I'll switch this up to, let's say, number of employees in each of these different categorizations, and then hit OK. And you can see there that we have 11 employees in administration, 2 of them have dependent insurance, 2 of them have family insurance, 6 have individual insurance, and 1 is terminated, things like that. Now that's one way of getting the count. Another way of getting the count is to just grab something that's not a number value. So when you drag a number value into the values box in your pivot table, by default it will add that thing. But if you take something like first name, for example, and drag first name into the values box, it will also count how many things there are within that categorization. So again, 14 total people in marketing, and the breakdown of how many people have dependent insurance versus family insurance, etc. Now, if we back up a second, let me go ahead and undo all the way back to before we had this pivot table. There we go. If you noticed, when I clicked on this data set, went to my Insert tab at the top of the screen and clicked on Pivot Table, here, it actually said, okay, well, we can put this pivot table in an existing worksheet. We can put it over here to the right. But notice right down here at the bottom, this checkbox that asks the question, do you want to add this data to the data model? Now, it only gives you this option if you have Excel 2016 or beyond. But watch the one thing that you can do with the data model turned on that you can't do if you're not using the data model. So I click the checkbox here, add this data to the data model, click OK. All the same things happen, but you notice it's taking just a little bit more time to spin here and think about it. Okay, so notice here that if we did add it to the data model, now we have this concept of having multiple tables that we can use as part of our pivot table data. You notice up here it says TBL employee insurance, and right up here it says, right now we're only looking at the active tables, but we could also look at all the tables. So you see some differences in there. Now, here's what I want to do. Let's say within every insurance type, right? So insurance type will be our row labels. We take department and we drag it into the values box. Now, by default, what this does is it counts up how many people, the number of people who are using dependent insurance or family insurance or individual insurance or are terminated. but it doesn't count the unique departments, right? So I may want to know whether there are 12 departments using dependent insurance. So if I click on Count of Department and go to Value Field Settings, what you'll notice right here at the bottom is this additional tool called Distinct Count. This is for unique counts. So a lot of times people think that count would be unique counts, distinct counts by default. But in fact, that standard way that pivot tables work, it just counts how many things match that criteria. It doesn't count the unique values. Here, when we turn on the Excel data model, when we add the table to the data model, we are given this additional feature called the distinct count. So I will call this unique entries, right, or something like that, and then hit OK. And you can see here that 13 departments use dependent insurance. 13 departments use family insurance, 13 departments use individual insurance, and only 8 departments use terminated, right, or have people who are terminated. So notice the difference there. If I grab something like first name, again, it counts how many people use dependent insurance. When I use distinct count, it will tell me how many people with that first name use dependent insurance. So that's how counting works inside pivot tables, whether you're using count for the total number of instances that match the thing you're looking for, or you're using the Excel data model and using that distinct count functionality. Have a great day.